Change is what life is. Buddhist wisdom. We say it to each other all the time. Things change. Time passes. Nothing lasts forever. But there is a difference between saying it and feeling it. The way you feel it when someone you love becomes a stranger, when a life you carefully built starts to unravel, when you catch a glimpse of yourself and wonder where the years went. In those moments, a question rises that most of us never quite answer. Not just whether things change, but why. Why is change not just something that happens to life, but the very thing life is made of? Over 2,600 years ago, a man named Siddhartha Gautama sat with that question under a tree in northern India. He did not build theories or argue philosophy. He turned his attention inward and looked directly at his own body and mind, moment by moment, with extraordinary patience. And what he found was not complicated, but it changed everything. Most of us think of change as something that happens to things. A flower blooms and then wilts. A friendship grows and then fades. A body ages. We see the change and we think, there was something solid there, and then it changed. As if change is an event that visits otherwise stable things. As if the default state of life is stillness, and movement is the exception. The Buddha saw it differently. In the Dhammapada, verse 277, he said, "All conditioned things are impermanent." When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. You might hear that and think, what is so special about this? Everyone knows that things change. It is one of the most obvious facts of life. We watch seasons turn, children grow, relationships evolve. We do not need a Buddha to tell us that nothing stays the same. And you would be right, if that were all the Buddha said. But his insight was not simply that things change. His insight was why. And he arrived at it not through abstract reasoning, but through direct observation of his own experience. Throughout history, many thinkers have reflected on change, but most approached it as a philosophical idea, something to debate, to theorize about, to fit into a system of thought. The Buddha took a different path. He did not speculate about the nature of reality from the outside. He sat down, turned his attention to his own body and mind, and watched what was actually happening. What he found was not a theory about change. It was the direct seeing of how things actually come into being and pass away. He did not just observe that the flower wilts. He looked into the flower and saw that there was never a fixed, solid flower to begin with. And that changes everything, because it means impermanence is not a misfortune that befalls an otherwise stable world. It is the very nature of how anything comes to exist at all. The key to this insight is one word: conditioned. In Pali, sankhara. It means things that exist because certain conditions came together to create them. The Buddha discovered this by looking at his own experience. He examined the body and saw that it depends on food, water, air, and warmth to exist. Remove any one of those, and the body begins to change. He examined feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and saw that each one arises from contact between the senses and the world. A sound reaches your ear, and a feeling arises, not because it was sitting there waiting, but because the conditions for it just came together. He examined thoughts, intentions, and awareness itself, and saw that none of them arise on their own. Every aspect of what we call our experience is conditioned, brought into being by other things coming together. And here is the insight that answers our question. The conditions that create something are themselves created by other conditions. The food that sustains your body came from soil. The soil came from decomposed matter. That matter came from other living things, sustained by yet other conditions. There is no point in the chain where you reach something fixed, something that simply is and does not depend on anything else. Every cause is itself an effect. Every condition is itself conditioned. The Buddha saw this first in his own body and mind, but the principle he uncovered, that conditioned things are impermanent precisely because their conditions are always shifting, does not stop at the boundary of personal experience. When we look at the world around us, we see the same pattern everywhere. A relationship exists because two lives met under certain circumstances. When those circumstances change, when people grow, when distance appears, when new experiences reshape how someone sees the world, the relationship changes too. Not because something went wrong, but because the conditions that shaped it are themselves in motion. A career exists because of skills, opportunities, and the state of the world at that moment. A season changes because the Earth's position relative to the sun is changing. Even the mountains, which seem so permanent, are being worn down grain by grain, reshaped by wind and water and the slow shifting of the earth beneath them. Nothing that exists because of conditions can remain unchanged, because the conditions that hold it together are always changing. This is not a flaw in life. This is not a problem to be solved. This is what it means for something to be conditioned. To be conditioned is to be impermanent. They are the same thing. And this is the answer to our question. Change is not something that happens to life. Change is what life is. A flower is not a stable thing that happens to wilt. Flower is the name we give to a particular pattern of conditions coming together. Soil, water, sunlight, and seeds meet, and we call the result a flower. When those conditions shift, the pattern shifts. The flower was never a fixed thing that then changed. The flower was the changing itself, from the very beginning. You are no different. Your body, your feelings, your thoughts, your relationships, the sense of who you are, all of it is conditioned, sustained by things that are themselves in motion. The person you were 10 years ago is not hiding inside you, unchanged. That person dissolved, condition by condition, and what sits here now is something new. And it, too, will continue to change, because the conditions that sustain it will continue to change. We spend our lives looking for something solid to stand on, a love that will not change, a body that will not age, a sense of self that will hold together no matter what. But every single thing we reach for is itself made of things that are moving. There is nothing fixed at the bottom. Not because something is missing, not because life is somehow flawed, but because fixed and permanent are simply not features of conditioned existence. They never were. And once you truly see that, a question naturally follows. If change is simply what life is, then why does it hurt so much when we experience it? You fall in love. Everything about the other person feels right. Without realizing it, you take a kind of snapshot. Their warmth, their laugh, the way they look at you, and hold it as a fixed image. This is who they are. Then time passes. They grow. They respond to life in ways you did not expect. And something inside you aches. This is not the person I fell in love with. But they never were a fixed person. They were always changing, just like you. The pain does not come from the change. It comes from the distance between the image you froze and the reality that kept moving. And the wider that distance grows, the more it hurts. That pain is real, It deserves to be held gently. The desire for love to stay the same is one of the most human things there is. You build a career, earn a title, develop a sense of who you are. I am a teacher. I am a successful professional. I am the kind of person who... That identity becomes an anchor. Then something shifts. The work changes. The satisfaction fades. The world around you moves in a direction you did not expect. The suffering is not caused by the fading. It is caused by the belief that it was supposed to last. You notice the signs of time in your own face. You scroll through social media and see curated moments from other people's lives. Their lives are also changing, also uncertain, also full of moments they would never share. But all you see is the frame they chose. And without meaning to, you measure your own unfolding, changing reality against someone else's still image. The Buddha gave this pattern a name. In his very first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, this is the noble truth of the origination of suffering, the craving that makes for further becoming, accompanied by passion and delight, craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, craving for non-becoming. The Pali word is taṇhā, craving, not desire in general, but a deep hunger for things to be a certain way and to stay that way. Craving for pleasure, the pull toward what feels good. Craving for becoming, the urge to arrive somewhere fixed where the struggle finally ends. And craving for non-becoming, the wish to make painful experience disappear. All three assume the same thing, that somewhere there is a fixed point. But as we saw, every condition is itself conditioned. There is no fixed point. So you reach for something, and for a moment, it feels like arriving. The craving quiets. There is a flash of ease, then conditions shift, and the reaching starts again. This is the cycle the Buddha saw turning inside the human heart. You take something moving and try to hold it still. You ache when reality refuses to match the image. Not because wanting good things is wrong, but because wanting them to be permanent is wanting something that conditioned life cannot give. But if the Buddha had only described the problem, his teaching would be just another way of saying life is hard. What makes it extraordinary is what he found on the other side. When people first hear that everything is impermanent, the heart often sinks. If nothing lasts, what is the point? That response is honest. The Buddha did not ask anyone to pretend it away. But here is what that first reaction misses. If nothing that brings you joy is permanent, then nothing that causes you pain is permanent either. The sadness you are carrying right now will not last forever. The fear, the confusion, the feeling of being stuck, they arose because conditions came together. When conditions change, they pass. You are not stuck. You are not the sum of your worst decisions. Those decisions arose from causes and states of mind that have already changed. Every moment is a genuine fresh start, not as a slogan, but as how conditioned reality actually works. The conditions that produced yesterday's suffering are not the same conditions present today. Something has already shifted, even if you cannot see it yet. If you have been carrying something heavy, a regret, a wound, a version of yourself you wish you could leave behind, that weight is also conditioned. It is also impermanent. It may feel permanent, the way a long night feels like it will never end. But it will end. Not because you forced it to, but because that is what conditioned things do. They arise, they persist for a while, and they pass. Healing is not about pretending the pain never happened. It is about understanding that the pain, too, is subject to change, and giving it room to move through you, instead of locking it in place. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply allow what hurts to be impermanent. To trust that the heaviness you feel right now is not the final word. In the Pabhasara Sutta, the Buddha said, "Luminous, monks, is the mind, and it is defiled by incoming defilements. Luminous, monks, is the mind, and it is freed from incoming defilements." Greed, confusion, anger, they are not your nature. They are visitors, not residents. Like dust on a mirror, they obscure what was already clear. But dust can be cleaned away. The entire Buddhist path exists for this reason, not to fix something broken, but to clear away what was never part of your deepest nature to begin with. And then something quiet happens. When you truly understand that every moment with someone you care about will never come again, you stop waiting. You stop assuming there will always be more time, more chances, another conversation. The ordinary morning, the unremarkable conversation over coffee, the sound of someone's voice saying your name, these things become precious. Not because anything about them has changed, but because you are finally seeing them for what they are. Fleeting, unrepeatable, and therefore infinitely valuable. The Buddha did not teach indifference. He taught the end of clinging. Clinging says, "I need this to last forever." Presence says, "This is here now, and it is enough." I think this is the most misunderstood part of the Buddha's teaching. People here let go and imagine coldness. But it is the opposite. When you stop clinging, you do not love less. You love more, because you are finally paying attention to what is here, instead of grieving what will eventually leave. Think of a candle flame. It looks steady, but it is never the same for 2 consecutive moments, constantly consuming and producing new light. You are that flame. Each moment, something old passes and something new arrives. And because you are always being made new, no matter what darkness you have walked through, you are not condemned to repeat it. The conditions that created that darkness have already changed. But knowing this in the mind is not the same as living it, which is why the Buddha did not just offer understanding, he offered a practice. Understanding impermanence is one thing, but how do you actually learn to live with it? Not as a concept you agree with, but as something you feel in your body, in your breath, in the way you move through each day. The Buddha's answer was remarkably practical. He did not ask people to believe anything. He asked them to pay attention. In the Satipatthana Sutta, he laid out a way of training attention that begins with the simplest things and gradually opens up into a direct seeing of how all experience works. He called it the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and he described them as the path where all aspects of practice come together. The Pali phrase he used was ekayano maggo, translated variously as the only way, the direct path, or the path to convergence. This practice is not separate from the Noble Eightfold Path. It is samasati, right mindfulness, the 7th factor. All 8 factors support each other and converge toward the same freedom. The first foundation is the body. The Buddha begins with your breath. When you breathe in, know it. When you breathe out, know it. Try it right now. Stay with your breathing for 1 full minute without the mind wandering. You will discover it is one of the hardest things a person can do, and one of the most revealing, because each breath is different from the last. There is no fixed breath, only this one, arriving and dissolving. Impermanence, felt directly in the body. From there, the practice extends. You observe posture, sensations, the body's textures and weight. What you once thought of as my body begins to reveal itself as a field of changing sensations, arising and dissolving moment by moment. The second foundation is feelings, the simple quality of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that colors every moment. You do not chase the pleasant or push away the unpleasant. You simply see what is present. And as you watch, the pleasant feeling that seems solid is already changing. The unpleasant one that seemed unbearable is already moving. The third foundation is the mind itself. The mind with desire or without, with anger or without. You notice which state is present, without judgment. Most of the time, we do not observe our mental states. We are swallowed by them. Mindfulness creates a space between experience and reaction. In that space, something appears. Choice. The fourth foundation is mental phenomena, the patterns and habits of the mind. In every case, the practice is the same. Observe the conditions that cause something to arise, and observe the conditions under which it passes away. When you practice this again and again, something shifts on its own. You begin to see directly that everything arising in your experience is impermanent. Every sensation, every feeling, every thought. And as that seeing deepens, something the tradition calls nibbida, disenchantment, begins to arise. Not sadness, not bitterness, simply the quiet recognition that you no longer need things to be other than what they are. The craving for permanence begins to loosen its grip, not because you forced it away, but because you saw clearly enough that it could not hold. Free to love without clinging, free to face loss without being destroyed, free to live in a world that is always moving, because you are no longer fighting the movement. The Buddha said anyone who develops these four foundations, even for 7 days, can expect deep transformation. Not monks only, not scholars only. Anyone willing to sit still and look honestly at what is happening inside them. Beyond the suttas, beyond the Pali terms, all of this points to something very simple. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to reach some extraordinary state of mind. You just need to see what is already happening, right now, in this body, in this breath. And if you are someone who has been quietly struggling with a loss that will not let go, with a life that did not turn out the way you planned, with a feeling that you are somehow behind or broken, I want you to know, the fact that things change is not your enemy. It is the very thing that makes healing possible. It is the reason no winter lasts forever. It is the reason the person you are today does not have to be the person you were yesterday. In my view, the deepest gift of the Buddha's teaching is not the philosophy. It is the permission. Permission to stop fighting what is. Permission to let go of the image of how your life was supposed to look. Permission to be exactly where you are, imperfect, uncertain, still learning. And to know that this has always been enough. The river is flowing. It has always been flowing. You cannot stop it. But you were never asked to. You were only ever asked to notice.